made a really big difference in writing this having support. Also to thank my committee members. Galen, thank you for your contributions and for meeting with me and your patience. And Professor Fracchia, thanks for just supporting me as an honors college student. And Stephen Wooten, who can't be here today, but I want to thank him as well. So, the title of my thesis is Framing Food Waste Incentives for Change. But the purpose of this defense is to kind of analyze the issue and present the economic and environmental costs, and also explore the incentives that promote waste and the incentives that promote us to change. The purpose of this defense is also to walk you guys, my audience, through the process that I went through and to reveal my main discoveries. So I chose to focus on food waste in the United States, and the reason why I chose it is simply because I live here and I think our culture and history is really interesting. I also think that cuisine in the U.S. is kind of emerging, and I think our relationship with food is strengthening. And there's also been a food movement growing in the past 40 years, and I want to be a part of the movement that contributes to social and health and environmental concerns surrounding food. The United States also kind of represents other more developed countries, and it's important to note that in more developed countries and less developed countries, food is wasted for really different reasons. So in more developed countries, it's more due to inconveniences, and in less developed countries, food is wasted due to lack of infrastructure, so like poor refrigeration and transportation. But talking about food waste in the United States is a global discussion. With globalization, we have global economies, global markets, global incentives, global environmental impacts, and the global food market is really prevalent in the United States. So my research question I came up with was actually kind of towards the end of the process, and it asked three main overarching questions. The first is, how should we frame this issue? What kind of lens should we look through? The second is, what are the current incentives that promote food waste, and what are the current incentives that promote mitigating food waste? And the second is, what current incentives promote food waste, and the third is, how can we use incentives to kind of reform this broken food system that we have? And to begin answering that question, I simply looked at food waste statistics in the United States and found that 40% of food produced for human consumption is wasted. So there's a USDA report that measured food waste in 2010, and they found that 21% is wasted by consumers and 10% is wasted by the retail level. And they didn't actually measure the farm level, but they estimate it rises another 10% when you add in the farm level. This is equal to 1,249 calories per capita per day, and that is enough to fill the Sears Tower, that huge tower in the middle right there with 108 stories, 44 times on an annual basis. It's important to note the challenge of measuring food waste. So besides actually like getting into dumpsters and kitchen bins and landfills, you can measure food waste by monetary value, by weight, by caloric content, or by nutritional content. Tristan Stewart, which is the lovely man in the left picture, he is one of the most well-known food waste activists and author, and he measures food waste including that which is edible for animals as well as humans. So his estimate is that 50% of food in the United States is wasted. Regardless of the food percentage, the precise percentage, the points that I'm going to make in this presentation are still relevant. So a little side note, why did I choose this topic? Why did I choose to write 50 pages and dedicate all this time to it? It first started with me really being terrified of waste. As Emma knows, I've always thought that humans' capacity for such mass amounts of waste is just really kind of incredible and terrifying. Waste infiltrates unknown areas of the world and previously untouched areas of the world. So it really is a prevalent issue in my mind. And why food? I chose to write about food because I love food. I took these pictures so you can tell. I think that cuisine is really important to culture and to community and family. Also, food is really cool because it affects everyone. We literally have to eat to survive. And it plays a role in everyone's lives. It affects our health, our attitude, our work performances, and our communities and our families. So the first main discovery I made is that food waste is an interdisciplinary issue. This food recovery hierarchy shows different approaches to mitigating food waste, and so each tier represents an order. So each tier represents each different action, and as you can see, different industries are involved. So feeding the hungry people might mean changing retail management and shifting it so that surplus food is donated. On the bottom of the pyramid, composting the landfill would be involved with waste management. So we have a lot of industries involved with mitigating food waste. And first and foremost, to me at least, it's an environmental issue because food waste exacerbates all the environmental issues that are inflicted by agriculture activities, including processing, production first, processing, transportation, retailing, and disposal. And reducing 1/3 of food waste, 1/3 is the statistic from the global statistic on food waste, is that 1/3 is wasted. So mitigating 1/3 of food waste is proportional to mitigating 1/3 of the environmental impacts caused by the food industry. Some statistics just to show the scale. Food waste, global food waste, is qualified as the third top greenhouse gas emitter after the United States and China. 30% of the world's agricultural land is used to produce food that's never eaten. The amount of water embedded in food waste is equal to 3 times the volume of Lake Geneva, which is one of the biggest and deepest lakes in Europe. And 1/4 of the United States agricultural water supply is consumed by food waste in the U.S. At the end of the food chain, food waste causes methane emissions. So food waste in landfills accounts for 21% of landfill solid waste. And then landfills overall in the United States account for 34% of human-caused emissions and methane emissions. And methane is a greenhouse gas 23 more times potent than CO2. So basically putting food into landfills is the worst thing we can do with that at the end of the chain. And second, food waste is an economic issue. So just the monetary value of food waste alone should provide this incentive to mitigate it. Back to that USDA report, in 2010, monetary losses were equal to 161 billion. And Romania's GDP in 2010 was 161 billion. And out of the 193 countries that the World Bank lists with their GDPs, Romania falls 48. So that's another around 150 countries that have the same GDP as food loss in the US or below it. And per capita per year, food waste, the amount of money lost in food waste is equal to $522. And food waste, the third way to frame food waste is as a political issue. So it's first important to note kind of the history of politics in the food movement, because the food movement is very young. As Michael Pollan puts it, compared to a much older environmental movement, the food movement hasn't really had its Earth Day yet. Up until the 1970s, food wasn't really on the political agenda, and people weren't really thinking about it with regards to health and social and environmental concern. And the history of civilization shows us that food isn't political unless there's scarcity. Thus, in the United States today, food is so cheap and abundant that it's not really a great political concern. Despite all of this, I see a rise in food as a political issue because in my lifetime, our population is supposed to reach its peak. And with growing affluence and kind of a steady pace of urbanization, there's going to be a higher demand for food, especially with urbanization. It kind of expands Western taste for very So productivity is kind of estimated to need to increase from 70 to 100% by 2050 if we continue business as usual. And because the United States has decided to partake in this global food system, it is going to be a political issue, even more than it is now. And reducing food waste is just one way that we can kind of shift the supply away from landfills to actually feeding people. But I'll talk more on the challenges of doing this a little bit later. The second discovery I made is that there are current incentives that promote people to waste food. As Tristan Stewart says, before we try to imagine possible solutions to the problem of food waste, it is vital to understand the reasons why people have certain behaviors. So again, back to that USDA report, they list the farm, retail, and consumer levels why food is wasted, and there's probably a couple dozen of them, but what really stood out to me was on the consumer level, food is wasted due to spillages, abrasion, bruising, and excessive trimming, and to me these just seem like very preventable things. For example, a couple of bruised bananas makes a really good banana bread. And on the retail level, culling blemished or misshapen or wrong-sized fruits, what we've called ugly fruits, is a reason why food is wasted at supermarkets. And I just wanted to bring light to this reason because there's this ugly food movement growing where supermarkets are starting to have bargain shelves with misshaped produce, and I think that's really great. Hopefully it expands beyond the Pacific Northwest. Besides these kind of more surface level reasons why food is wasted, there's these really deep-rooted reasons that are instilled in our culture, in our economic structures, in our political relationships, and in advertising and marketing. And one example that I find really interesting is government subsidies. And these began during the Great Depression as a way to protect farmers, but they've grown into this permanent legislation. And subsidizing commodity crops, particularly like wheat, corn, soy, and sugar, drives down the price of processed foods. And the cheaper food is, the more we're going to waste. If you go out to pizza with friends and you get a slice of pizza and it's only 50 cents to add a soda that's full of corn syrup, subsidized corn, the benefit of you knowing you just have that soda probably will outweigh the cost of potentially throwing away your 50 cents and that entire cup of soda. Then there's a really interesting question of whether or not we're wasting food when we eat food that has no nutritional value. So if we're eating food that actually works against our health and is going to cause us long-term medical bill costs, that's kind of another challenge of, is that wasting food? Is it not? Which brings me to my third discovery, which is that food waste on all levels stems from this very deeply rooted culture of abundance. So in order to change that culture, we need this big generational cultural change. So our culture of abundance was fueled by World War II when the United States and its allies kind of defeated the enemies by outproducing them. And it continued, but productivity continued past World War II. It continued to increase. And then in the 1960s, with fueling advertising, we came to this consumer era where we kind of came to value quantity in things over quality, whether it be cars or cigarettes or a refrigerator full of food. Our culture started to measure happiness and wealth based on quality of goods that we owned. And this culture of abundance, especially with regards to food, is able to flourish in the United States because of the industrial agricultural practices. We can make really cheap food. So obviously you can buy more if it's cheaper. Note the picture on the top. I think there's like more than a dozen Campbell's tomato soup for less than $1. So looking towards how can we prevent and kind of resculpt our culture to kind of rid ourselves of this culture of abundance, there's 4 examples we can use. These are ironically outlined by a Republican politician, Mike Huckabee, who looks at the biggest 4 changes that he saw in his life. And the first was the campaign against littering. The second was the ban on indoor smoking. The third was using seatbelts. And the fourth was awareness about drunk driving. So to our generation, these seem like very obvious things, but they really took a huge cultural change. And Mike Huckabee outlines that it took 3 major kind of overarching aspects. The first one is atmosphere. So example is smoking, isolating non-smokers and smokers. The second is attitude. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving campaign was particularly focusing on attitude and how drunk driving affects people's lives on a more personal level. And the third is age. So just the fact that it takes an entire generation to cycle through and to implement these changes. So where does this bring us with food waste? I really like these pictures. If anyone wants to check them out, they're pretty fun. So the first, I think, is changing our attitude to value quality in food over the quantity of food. The second is to create atmospheres that connect us with the origin of our food. So one great example is connecting children, so having school gardens. As Galen has said, he was a farmer, so he would know. You are more likely, or less likely, I guess, to throw out a tomato you grow with your own hands rather than one you buy at the supermarket. And then third, with the entire generation change, I think that wasting food can become something that we consider sort of taboo. And also we can gradually shift to increase food prices to reflect their true, honest value, where everyone from growing the food to distributing the food is paid a fair wage. So that brings me to my 4th discovery, which was that food waste is a significant inefficiency in our global and national food system, but the prevention of food waste has the capacity to reform the global food system. But there's a huge challenge in redistributing food away from landfills and into those in need, as well as what will actually happen to the global market if food waste prevention does end up occurring. So we have this huge global food system, and it kind of works off imbalances where Western nations demand really high quantity of cheap goods, and oftentimes developing countries bear the social and environmental costs of producing those cheap goods. And then we have this huge excess supply. But honest food prices can lead to less waste in 2 ways. First, they can make it just unaffordable to waste food. And second, honest food prices make it sustainable for farmers around the world to be fairly compensated, which eliminates desperate overproduction. And I know that I'm not an agriculture economist, and the solution to food waste is probably much more complex than presented in this slide. But the point I'm trying to convey is that preventing food waste is an entire package deal. And in this way, it is at the center of the reformation of the food system. Food waste is political, it's environmental, it's economic, and it's social. Not just because of the cost that food waste causes, but because of the solutions that food waste prevention calls for. So food waste prevention calls for honest food prices, relieving farmers from overproduction, connecting people to the origin of food, challenging people to consume healthier food and take preventative rather than reactive measures with regards to their personal health. It calls for respecting ecosystems around the world. And what I consider the most important, food waste prevention calls for reshaping family values to value quality of food over quantity of food, to find happiness in slowly consuming and feasting on nutritious and delicious food, while building intimate relationships with both the people we consume food with and the food that we consume. So, in conclusion, I want to make the very important point that it's not individual behavior that causes food waste. It's not that our species are intrinsically wasteful, nor are we frugal. I've learned that entire systems, economic structures, political relationships, marketing and advertising incentivize us to behave in this way. But now that you do know about food waste, now that you guys are all aware, I encourage you to buy the food that you will eat and eat the food that you will buy.
Thank you, Zoe. That was actually very succinct because I know you have so much more you could have talked about. And so we appreciate that. We'll leave time for questions. Let's start with Professor Croft.
Actually, we'll start with Luke.
Okay.
We'll borrow one of his questions first. Start with some easy ones. One of his questions is, who's in the food waste prevention group? Describe the group, who's leading, who's following, why. So just tell us about the food movement.
Yeah. I mean, I think that environmentalists are leading it. I mean, I kind of framed it first environmental, then economic, then political. So I do think that, I mean, I'm pretty biased because I'm an environmental studies major, but I do think that they have a really strong connection. And part of my thesis, as you two know, talks about how the food movement and environmental movement have so many like cohesive things about them. And then, I mean, food markets are a huge part of global and national and local economies. So I think economists should be involved in it. I hope that, I mean, from what I've seen, I think food is a growing field in economics, so I think that plays a big role. And then I think once those are kind of like solidly established, political leaders then have both pressure from environmentalists and reason from economists to become more involved.
So foodies part of it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define foodies, but yeah, I mean, anyone that really cares about food and really values food shouldn't be wasting it. It should be really caring a lot about eating, you know, everything that they purchase and being really conscious about purchasing decisions. So.
Is there sometimes overly sophisticated approach to very expensive foods having anything to do with the claims of elitism in the food movement? I mean, most people can't even make some of the things that foodies do, which I think are good. Food, don't get me wrong here, but you know, a lot of the things advocated by the food movement are, just in terms of time and preparation, almost beyond the possibilities of most people have to work with.
Yeah, definitely. I've gotten a lot of questions about how food waste is correlated to socioeconomic status. And I looked it up, I tried to find stuff, but I couldn't find anything. It's just really it's been brought to our attention very recently. Even in the past 6 months, there's been a lot of articles and stuff coming out, which has been really cool to see. But so I haven't seen anything. I imagine there's kind of a threshold with socioeconomic status and food waste where people up into a certain income probably aren't wasting because they can't afford to waste, but then there's kind of that middle class that have still buy cheap food, but a lot of it. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about like kind of middle-priced Mexican restaurants that just serve like the hugest plates of food, and then you have more of these upscale restaurants that are moving towards tiny portions. Even just talking.
Higher prices too.
Yeah, exactly. Even just talking to a couple of restaurants in Portland, a lot of the managers say how they're trying to really watch their consumers and see how much they actually eat and then adjust the portion sizes, because it's almost like this high-end thing. If you have extra food on your plate, that's maybe doesn't look the best at a more upscale restaurant. So that is interesting.
May I get nosy and ask what the restaurants were?
I don't remember. It was actually like a bar on Mississippi. Yeah.
Then you had one of your slides, or whatever we call them these days, images, I guess. You had some percentages. The 21% food waste is consumer, 10% retail, and 10% farm. That's 41%. What happens to the other 59% of waste?
So those percentages are within the overall 40%. Oh yeah, I guess.
No, it's of food produced.
Yeah, exactly.
Of
Oh.
So
40% of food
sorry,
produced for human consumption.
Yeah.
Okay. I was confused.
Yeah, I guess I should, yeah.
The other thing I was confused on, then we'll get into some bigger questions, is this phrase, efficiency prevails productivity. I'm not sure what that means.
Okay, so like I said, it's much more complicated than I think I would like to make it. But we have said all these statistics are out, like we need to increase productivity. We need to do it in whatever different ways, whether it's like GMOs or coming up with different technology practices for agriculture. But if we can actually make the food market more efficient, so not let food waste kind of slide out of the market along the entire chain in all these different ways, because that's a pretty inefficient market, and actually keep it in the chain and then get it from seeds to people's plates, perhaps we won't have to focus so much on productivity and we can focus more on efficiency. And from an environmental perspective, that's what we want to do, because if we increase productivity by up to 100%, I mean, that's going to have really prominent effects on the environment.
I think some of the confusion is that you need to borrow a preposition to make that phrase clear.
Okay.
It just prevails over.
Yeah, okay.
So that's, I think that, I don't know if
That's part of
it comes off as a
Okay.
specialized term, but I think you're just missing.
Yeah, okay.
But I think you did.
Well,
Did that answer?
Questions
it wasn't intentional, but that leads right into my big questions. So, which I have a couple of them. You frame this. I mean, you talk about political. So this is. You did a great job. This is kind of on the fringes of the analysis space. So, you tend to frame it as an ethical problem. And, certainly all of us, as you've convinced already, some of your friends and family to change their habits can do a lot to bring down that 21% and so on. But I'm wondering if framing it as an ethical problem kind of puts too much responsibility on consumer behavior, which is a crucial part of it, and doesn't really get at the question, right embedded in this phrase, efficiency prevails over productivity. First of all, both of those terms, efficiency and productivity, can be defined in very different ways. I mean, I would define efficiency in terms of not wasting, whereas the logic of the market, which you allude to, is there's a business ethic as well as a personal ethic. And in our society, I mean, the first responsibility of a business is to make profit. And for that business then, maximizing productivity is at the same time maximizing efficiency, which leads to overproduction. And actually, one of the crazy things, Marx makes this comment somewhere, that in the modern world, crises are crises of overproduction. Scarcity has been the case in most of human history. So, now, on the one hand, I think we can all agree that your comment that we should be ethically responsible individuals. How do you get businesses to be ethically responsible when their whole notion of ethics, responsibility, efficiency, productivity are practically diametrically opposed to what you're saying they should do?
I think first by challenging or requiring them to measure how much they waste, because I think a lot of businesses don't actually know that they're wasting the amount of food that they are wasting.
I'm much more cynical in that respect than you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I mean, from what I've learned, managers kind of tell actually workers what to do, and workers are ones taking these products off the shelves. But I also think that it comes from this culture of abundance. So supermarkets stock such high quantities of goods, and restaurants, I guess, because they think that that's what consumers demand. So that's why I think that no matter, we could put in like a tax for food waste. France actually has a nationwide bill that every supermarket has to pair with a charity and donate all their surplus food. So we could do something like that, but I think in the United States it needs to come from like kind of this changing culture. And I guess, I mean, I don't know much about business. I say exactly, but I do think that, I mean, retailers have to be losing food. They have to be losing profit by wasting this much. I think sometimes they bear the burden onto either like the farm or the manufacturer, so that's a huge problem. Usually the manufacturer bears the burden of them wasting, but so I guess just like connecting those ties with manufacturers and farms and providing them incentive.
There is a lot of work that shows that overproduction and expected waste is calculated into the whole business practices. So that's a different issue. But this is fun. All kinds of good questions. Two. One is about politics, and one is, certainly we need regulation, but what do you do in a society controlled by a Congress that has absolutely no interest in regulation? I mean, you talk about the government as almost has the ability to, if it would just go ahead and do it, it could solve the problem, but there are all kinds of contending forces in Congress that are adamantly opposed to any kind of solution that of the kind you would propose.
Yeah. Well, they have I think it was started in 2015, there's a National Food Waste Challenge that the USDA and EPA joined together to start, and I think that's just the first step that they're taking. I mean, like I said, I think we need to pressure them more, like why do policies happen from pressure from, whether it's the agriculture industry lobbying to the politicians to Congress, or businesses lobbying to them, or consumers pressuring them. I think that like politics kind of plays more of a role further along as this becomes a more prevalent issue in our culture. I also think that pressure from other countries, I mean, like I said, I really think what France did is great, and they just did it. There was a lot of backlash. The supermarkets were like, they only contribute 5% of the overall food that's wasted, so they're like, why do we have to do this? And they actually fought the bill, but it passed. And so in the United States, we obviously have a lot of trouble pushing past what the citizens demand. But I think that, politics plays like a little bit of a later role. If things get really serious, maybe it's something like a tax or mandatory policy. But for now, hopefully it's just public awareness campaigns.
Just one more. It's a good one too. This term "culture of abundance" bothers me. And you said in your presentation that the food movement is young. And when you separate the food movement as a movement against waste and oppose that to previously food movements were about scarcity. I guess two kinds of questions. One is, do we really live in a culture of abundance? And should these two directions or related perspectives on food, one of too much and one of too little, be conceived of as opposites? So if that doesn't make sense, tell me.
Yes, I think we have a culture of abundance. I mean, that's been kind of drilled in my head as an environmental studies major.
But we do have immense poverty in the United States.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I guess your second question just gets at the complete socioeconomic disparity we have in the U.S. and that, what is it, if we mitigate 15% of food waste, that amount could feed 25 million hungry Americans. So I guess, I'm trying to think, I want them to be the same issue. I kind of want them to come together and work together. And I guess I do think they do, because if you have those of higher socioeconomic status demanding more food and being the ones that are getting the nutritious food and the healthy food and the local food, and then you have people of lower socioeconomic status that are eating processed bad food and they suffer from food deserts and food scarcity, I do think that those two issues are connected. And I think that it just comes back to our huge imbalance in the United States. I wish I could answer that better, but I don't think I know enough about food systems to say what is the direct correlation between food scarcity and food.
So here's a question that answers itself. Wouldn't it make sense then for the food movement and then things like, say, workers' rights and workers' the pay and so on for them to be alive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Back that out a little bit further, maybe. Are you talking more about the culture of consumerism as opposed to? Because, so in other words, what are the values of consumerism as opposed to the culture of abundance? Is that more useful in thinking about why we treat food the way we do as a convenient product? You know, what are the, in other words, the values and choices embedded in consumerist thought plays itself out in the food system in kind of perverse ways.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So if we kind of start with, so we have this culture of consumerism, and because consumers demand so much of, different markets, they overproduce and provide us with abundance. It's back to that. I just think it's a great example why supermarkets stock their shelves so full. It's because they think consumers aren't going to buy a tomato if there's only, a dozen of them rather than if there's 5 dozen of them, sitting in this big supermarket bin. So I guess, it does come from first that consumption, and then that kind of fuels an abundant
Think
society.
about, for example, why do most people choose the foods they do, and how is that related to waste? So 2 parts. First of all, what are the values implicit in the way we choose food?
Yeah. So first, money, right?
The price.
Yeah, the prices of food, convenience, and just caloric content, so feeding themselves.
Some kind of satisfaction.
Getting full, taste satisfaction. So I guess, those are related to waste in the sense of what I kind of touched on with, are we wasting food when we're eating food that doesn't have nutritional value? So when we choose to purchase food that is solely based on money and based on taste and based on convenience, that might cause us to waste. I'm thinking of, especially with convenience, if you won't have the taste for, an entire bag of chips, and you're going to end up throwing half of it away, but it's so cheap, so that's okay with you. So I think if we chose food based on more important things like nutritional value, where it came from, all sorts of different things, how it makes us feel health-wise, mentally, then we wouldn't waste because we're clearly seeing the benefits of the food that we're consuming. So I do think that.
Do you think it's less waste if I ate the whole bag?
That is a huge problem because sometimes I do that. And
it's okay.
Yeah.
So is that not food waste because it was consumed?
No, I think it is. You brought up that point a couple months ago where if we're wasting, are we wasting if we overeat or if we eat food that's not nutritious? I don't know.
It's still not going to some place where it could benefit.
Yeah,
someone.
I guess the good thing is it's not going into a landfill. And as we've talked about, landfills are the worst place to put wasted food. So in that sense, it's not wasted, but I do think overeating is wasting food.
Okay.
Yeah.
So could waste be defined as food waste could be defined as food that doesn't have a benefit.
Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, you could consume food and still wouldn't be beneficial. In fact, it might be detrimental to your health. So is that food waste? One of Stephen's questions too. What about meat?
Yeah.
Is
That's a really
feeding
good question.
food that is, in theory, edible by humans, soy, for example. Soy has to be processed, so he said. We don't just sit down and eat a bowl of soy.
Yeah.
Right? We don't sit down and eat a bowl of meat for that matter. It has to be processed to some extent. Is meat wasteful by your definition of food waste?
At our current consumption rates, yes. I've said this, all my friends know this, I think that it's okay to eat meat. I think that we just eat way too much of it. And like I said, it's really interesting. I think that as urbanization stays steady and more people move to urban areas, they increase their taste for meat. And I think that we're wasting it in the sense of that alternatives would provide us with this equivalent amount of energy and nutrition. So in that sense, I think we are wasting it just because the meat industry is so energy and land and water intensive. I
But
think
it's maybe not intrinsically wasteful, but
the way that we're doing it and the population size and the amount of meat that we eat, I think that it is wasteful because we could be equally as. I mean, I think some people like their bodies work if they need meat, but I think that we could be equally. We could eat, we could just shift the food we eat, and we could gain the same nutrition value and the same energy. So I do think in that sense that we're wasting a lot of meat.
So back to a sort of methodological question, because you raised it in your presentation. It's actually, you don't talk about it much here. We can talk about that. So there are different ways of measuring waste. One of them you talked about, is it moving up the food chain? Is that wasteful? Is overeating wasteful? But you mentioned 4 things, right? As we get these figures about levels of food waste, it's kind of confusing because there are different ways of looking at it. So the ones you mentioned were by weight, right? By nutrition, by calorie, and what was the other?
Value,
price value,
retail
okay.
value.
All right. So of those 4, which do you think are the most? What's the most important?
Yeah.
Given the way you set up your whole thesis. If you had to choose one.
Okay. Well, like my personal self, I think nutritional value, but I think that's really hard to measure when we're trying to lead towards preventing food waste. So I definitely think price. I think monetary value. I think that
because that's most compelling to people.
Yeah, I think it provides the most incentive. I mean, that 161 billion is pretty shocking, and I think that when that gets out, I mean, whether we like it or not, our society uses typically monetary incentive to make changes. So I think that, I really look at this issue as very solution-oriented. So I think in looking towards solutions, we should be kind of focusing on measuring it in monetary value. But then there's a problem with that we don't even have honest food prices. So if we did, that value would probably be a lot higher. But I think for now, within the next however many years, to initiate food waste prevention, we should be kind of focusing on that.
So, okay, back up, bigger question.
Okay.
I think, your argument's very compelling. I think it's hard-pressed to find anybody who doesn't think that food waste is wrong, so from the ethical perspective, and it's hard to argue that it would be pretty easily prevented. So why are we here? How did we get here?
Yeah. There's so many reasons, but I think it just really comes with that we, and this is coming from my environmental background, are so disconnected with so many products, not just food, but so many products that we buy, clothes we wear, or laptops, and everything we have. We're just really, it's kind of like that out of sight, out of mind. But then on top of this, we have this huge globalized world, and there's so many links and connections, and it's so complex, and there's social issues and environmental issues, and they're happening all over the place, and they're really overwhelming. And I think that a lot of people just kind of push it out of the way, I do it. Like if I throw away like a bag of lettuce and feel really bad about it, I just like kind of shove it down there and like put it underneath something so I can't see it. So I think that it has partially to do with the consequences or outcomes, I guess, of our globalized world, and then also to do with our disconnect and the very long chain we've created between the production of products and the actual consumption of it.
Well, we're really stepping back and forth in scale here, so now it's sort of pragmatic. I've often wondered why more. So go to Cafe Yum, and you can order a small, medium, or large yum. It just makes sense to me. Why don't restaurants offer a choice of? We don't all eat the same amount of food.
Yeah.
My wife, when we go to a restaurant, never finishes whatever. If we order the same thing. So what's to prevent restaurants from offering options besides a half sandwich and a full sandwich? Other than that, you don't almost never get a choice.
Yeah,
It's just something that's been wondering.
That's a big thing for restaurants.
Interesting if you've thought about this.
Not really. I've more thought about just portion sizes in general and how they've really increased over the year. If you look at like the Big Mac in 1950, it was like this big, and now it's like that big.
There wasn't
or whatever. McDonald's burger. I've just seen that picture a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think so. I guess maybe retail management probably tracks waste a little bit better than restaurants. I know that there are apps now that restaurants can use to track their waste, so they can put in like all the food that they buy. I'm not sure exactly how they work, but I've seen those, and that's like one way that National Food Waste Challenge is challenging restaurants. So, I mean, I guess partially because they don't know. I think people making those higher up retail decisions, I mean, I don't know a lot about the restaurant industry, but maybe aren't actually there so much and seeing, all the bussers scrape that extra food into the trash can. I think that it's not a cultural norm, so if you go into a restaurant, maybe that's off-putting. Like, why shouldn't I be able to just, I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be great. I guess with a change like that, we need information. I think that's the biggest thing with food waste. If we make these changes, we need to inform individuals why we're doing them. So hopefully that's one way that restaurants will think about it, and they can change that.
One of the things I like about what you do in the paper is you show these connections, and you don't get drawn into this either or one solution fits all. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit more about the interplay between how retailers try to get us to buy food and how consumers can also push back and say, we don't want this, we don't need this. Because we often get, when we go to grocery stores, for example, and we say, why do you do this behavior that doesn't make environmental, in some cases even economic sense, they often will say what? Because that's what consumers want.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you go to the consumers and they say, well, because we don't have much choice. So can you talk a little bit more about that interplay, feedback loop for changing, for reducing food waste in general?
Yeah, the retail level stands at a really good position because they do have the ability to inform consumers, and I think if they can have economic incentive to reduce waste, and then they can inform consumers as to why they have these like ugly produce shelves or just less food on their shelves, or another big one is sell by and best by dates, and maybe why they aren't showing dates, which probably some of them shouldn't be on their products. So I don't know. I mean, I guess from what I've read a lot is that retailers think consumers are demanding this, and a part of me thinks that they actually are. I mean, from the documentary Just Eat It, one of the farmers at the farmer's market has one cabbage left, and it's just never bought. It sits on the shelf for hours, and he says consumers turn away because they think there must be something wrong with that one cabbage left. And so I think that there is a miscommunication between retail stores and consumers, and I'm not entirely sure what consumers are demanding. I think it depends on where you are. I think that I see Oregon taking a lot of strides towards reducing food waste by providing bargain shelves. For example, I read something that was saying, supermarkets don't want to have bargain shelves because it makes them look cheap. And I was like, what? Because in Eugene, that's not true at all. Everyone would be like, oh, that's awesome. There's this bargain shelf that has, bruised apples. If we could just cut off that bruise and you have 75% of an apple for 75% of the price. So I think it depends where you are. I think consumers at times are actually demanding these things, and then at other times supermarkets think they are. And then you have national chains that have
control the
same,
advertising.
Yeah, and then advertising plays a huge role in that too. So I think that it partially has to do just with the United States consumer being so different. But the fact that a lot of these retail stores are chains around the nation, they kind of have to adapt to what they see their consumers' demands are. Does that answer your question? Okay.
everybody's feedback loops.
Yeah.
You certainly learned the methodology of environmental studies. Do you have any more questions, or were there any from Stephen that we need to?
I have a comment and two lighthearted questions,
Okay.
one of which is related to the comment. You write in your thesis, food is not just a commodity, but a vital interface between people and the earth. And I was going to ask you, but you answered that question just a minute ago. Isn't that true of all commodities? Because all commodities are made of raw materials. So I think what you said a few minutes ago was really important. And that leads into this whole question that we were just discussing about consumerism and so on. Did I show in that class last year the video of the AMF commercial?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you seen this?
Sure.
AMF, this came out in the 70s. AMF is a sporting goods company. And it's an animated video of a building and a little blob crawling across the landscape with a rain cloud over its head, raining. And this little blob, and the building has AMF right across the forehead. And so the blob crawls across the landscape under the rain, and it says, the building looks at it and says, well, little blob, why are you crying? And the little blob says, because my name is Monday. Everybody hates me because I'm the first day of the work week. So the next thing you see is AMF says, I know what we'll do. We'll make weekends. And then you see this rolling landscape on a little road across, and down the road come golf clubs and yachts and bowling balls and all the goods that they make. I mean, here what you have is a concerted effort, I mean, acknowledged in the commercial itself, to convince people that they need something that they don't, because their lives are otherwise so miserable, the work week. And I mean, it seems to me that the relation to the other commodities, not just food. And one of the, and this is not really a question, it's just one of the powerful things that needs to be considered is precisely this manufacturing of needs through the advertising industry. The other comment, quickly, you showed a Twinkie. Do you know about the Twinkie defense? Anybody here know about the Twinkie defense? Sorry? No, this was in San Francisco. They probably don't. That's the frightening thing. In, when was it, the early 70s, I think, where a crazed person killed the mayor and the high city official. And he claimed that he had eaten too much Twinkies and they derailed his mind and led him to homicidal tendencies. So there's a good example for your crappy food and bad consequences. And I mean, it was unbelievably, actually, I can't remember the detail.
I've never
No,
had
it didn't work.
Anyway, that's all.
Yeah, I use that picture because Michael Pollan, he's like my favorite writer about food, and he compares a Twinkie to a carrot and explains why processed foods are so cheap. He's like, we have this Twinkie, we process it, we refine it, we package it, and there's so many hands that touch this Twinkie to get to your plate, and a lot of carrots are pulled from the ground, cleaned, and they're on your plate, so why is the Twinkie cheaper? And it's because it's subsidized commodity crop, so I just think that was a really good example. It really stuck with me. Yeah, like it's economies of scale.
Can I answer?
Yeah.
I was wondering, so I feel like in recent times, the whole green consumer trend has been really catching on, and people often choose to buy products that are labeled green or eco-friendly or stuff like that. Do you think that can tie into the food waste movement and kind of make it become like hip? And then you have the issue of also the paradox of that being people buy green products because it says that they're green, but they're not necessarily natural.
Yeah, I think the parallel to that is that like rebound effect is composting. Everyone has been asking me like, oh, you're writing your thesis on food waste. What do you think about composting? It's awesome, all that stuff. And I didn't even like talk about composting because it would have been like 10 pages of me ranting about it. Because I think it is an excuse to overbuy. People are like, oh, I'm gonna get an extra pancake with my eggs, and it's gonna compost. It's okay. And it's like there's actually environmental impacts of composting. There's social impacts of composting. So composting kind of worries me. Obviously we shouldn't be putting food in landfills, but having all these composting events around campus, I mean, I wish someone would put a sign being like, just because you're composting doesn't mean you should buy more. So I think that kind of is a parallel to green.
So compost is waste still.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's still, you still wasted all that water and all that energy and everything, all the labor that goes along with it. Unless you're using it, I guess, for your own personal garden.
Just putting it back into the soil.
Yeah, you're rejuvenating it and using energy. But,
Yes, go ahead.
So I know, like we went to Naomi Klein's talk and I loved her book. Do you think that we're going to need ultimately to overhaul or shift slightly, at least, our general economy away from capitalism and that need and demand for businesses? You know, our bottom line comes from growth and more production, growing market share, and that directly impacts, you know, social costs, environmental costs, and production and everything all the way through. Do you think that our economy is going to need to shift to actually have an effect for businesses from a business standpoint?
yeah, I mean, I think generally with regards to like overall consumerism, yes, Gail and I have talked about how our system is so focused on productivity and like growth, constant productivity, constant growth. But with regards to food waste, I don't think so, because there are monetary costs in food waste right now, and especially as individuals. I mean, I didn't calculate it, but I really think that I saved money this year thinking so much about food waste and choosing what to buy, you know, buying like frozen and canned stuff and actually making sure my pantry was empty before I went to the store. So I think that there are incentives right now for people to not waste food. I think that, like I've said, I think we need more honest food prices. So I do think food waste is something we can change without changing our entire capitalist system. I think that if that change does happen, it'll help further along the road, further down the road, just with regards to overall consumption and productivity. But also food is something we need. Like we have to eat it every single day. We don't have to buy new cars and clothes and all those other things every day. So I think in that sense it doesn't quite completely fit into like Naomi Klein's argument, because we really do need it.
I just thought of this, and I don't think that we've talked about it before, but do you think you can correlate the United States' obsession with sanitation to food waste?
I mean, definitely to process food. Yeah, I guess I do think so, because I think it makes us value it in different ways. So, like I've talked about, cosmetically damaged or misshaped fruit. So a lot of times a ton of produce is thrown out, especially like with skins that have like deformations or little scarring or stuff like that. And people see that and they might think like, oh, this has like a worm in it, or I don't know, I think this isn't good for me. And that partially has to do just because we're so disconnected with food and we don't actually know what is, when is there actually a problem and it's going to make us sick, or when is it just a, blemish. So I think that probably plays a role in why we pick food, and I think why we pick the food that we pick leads to food waste. So yeah, it was a great question. And that reminds me that only food that is actually requires an expiration date is baby food formula. So I think that with sanitation, we often associate cleanliness or healthiness with appearance, but we've kind of lost touch of our senses, so we don't smell meat to see if it's bad. Yeah, we just look at the expiration date, and then you can put eggs in a cup of water, and if it floats, you probably shouldn't eat it because it has gas built up in it. So I think, getting that kind of gets in how we're just not in touch with our senses, and we just look at like labels. We trust the labels rather than our own senses.
So I actually took a class with Kayla in freshman year, and I'm just because of Zoe, I go on really into all of this, but I'm an English major, so forgive me, my jargon isn't right, asking this question, but I remember one of the biggest things I learned is just this whole supermarket thing in our country is, I'm not saying they don't exist, I mean obviously going to Spain there were supermarkets, but I remember this one day I went with my host mom and I saw the way that she shopped for groceries, and I don't even know if that's the right term, because all of the specified food, we're allocating the specified food markets. You would get your fish at a fish market. And I remember reading something from Michael Pollan about we've lost this reciprocity and talking with farmers and seeing where we're getting our food, and then farmers also receiving feedback about the way that their food is produced. And I saw her interact, asking where the food comes from. And I just noticed that you're talking a lot about like this disconnectivity. We don't have like an origin of education as much in our country to learn about what we're eating, how we're feeling our bodies. And so I guess what my question is how do you what are some like educational reforms that you see like having like a big impact on the way that we from the get-go raise our children and like their families to know how this system really should work?
Yeah, well, first of all, you get at, I'll answer your question in a second, but you get at 2 points. First is that my earlier point is retail management and maybe like restaurant management is happening far away from the actual food, whereas, a retailer might be making a decision about Walmart in like a headquarters office and they have no idea, like they're not there, they're not seeing it. So, if you see an entire dumpster full of something, it might make you change your decisions. So that probably helps when farmers are seeing their own food being wasted when they're at the market. And then secondly, the fact that in the United States we do have such these large supermarkets. So one, it makes us probably over-purchase and purchase things that we don't really need. I mean, how many times has it happened where you go into Target thinking you're going to buy 2 things and you come out with 10? And if it's food, you might end up wasting it because you didn't really need it, but you thought you did when you were in the store. So having more local markets that we can quickly go to and get groceries for half the week or the week, I think would be great. I don't know. I mean, I think farmers markets are rising in the United States, which is great. But
very quickly.
Yeah, so I think with what you said, the reason why I included those school lunches is because I think it really starts with children. I mean, children eat every day at school, so I think having school gardens is huge. And I think that, especially because those can be put into different areas of like lower and higher socioeconomic status, I think he made a really good TED talk about this guy in LA that was helping with urban agriculture, and I just think that's really huge because urbanization is happening, there's no way we're going to stop it, and that's bringing people further and further away from farms and rural areas and further disconnects. I think bringing food into urban areas. So to answer your question, I think with children, I think we can help them form a better connection with food, and clearly looking at those school lunches right now, it's not going so well. We don't. Gail and I were talking about this yesterday in France. They have like a head chef at every school, and they come in with the meals, and they're all like individual products. In the United States, we just have this very like eat quick, run outside for 20 minutes, and it's not like a social gathering to eat and respect your food. So I think starting in schools would be a really great thing. If anyone needs to leave too, go ahead.
I kind of want to like touch
Just
on
take a couple more questions.
What Kiki was talking about. We went to this like talk last night by Andy Keller, who invented the Chico bag because hated seeing all of the like plastic bags, and he mentioned the like invention of cellophane as something to like wrap your food in to keep it clean.